Hello, ladies and germs. Welcome to another daily movie review. Today, we're going to be talking about John Boorman's 1974 film, Zardoz. The film, directed and written by John Boorman, stars Sean Connery, Charlotte Rampling, Sarah Kesselman, John Alderton, Sally Ann Newton, Bosco Hogan, and others. The plot description: in the distant future, a savage trained only to kill finds a way into the community of bored immortals that alone preserves humanity's achievements. So, where to even begin? How do you talk about Zardoz? It's a weird movie. It's a curiosity. And it was made kind of with, I don't know if I would say they're noble intentions, but the production of it surrounding it is kind of interesting. John Boorman, kind of journeyman director. We've talked about him before. We've talked about a few of his movies, I think. Well, at least we did a video about one of his movies, Point Blank. But I've talked about John Boorman a few times. And John Boorman's like one of these great journeyman, workman-like directors that kind of was just really good at the fundamentals of filmmaking and storytelling. And as a result, he gets a lot of work. Probably was a really nice guy, too, on top of that. Because he has such an eclectic breadth of like genres that he was involved in. I mean, he does everything from comedies, revenge thrillers, fantasy films, straight dramas. I mean, you name it. He did everything. He did one of my all-time favorite movies, which is the 80s Excalibur movie. That's one of my all-time favorites. But he comes to Zardoz out of frustration. He was in pre-production, heavy pre-production on live-action versions of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings movies. Or books, rather. He was going to do film adaptations of the books. And somehow, that's such a big undertaking. People, financiers, whatever, got cold feet. It kind of falls apart. So, but he's still into fantasy and allegory and wanting to do something fantastical. So he comes up with this idea of Zardoz. And he was inspired by this idea. He was kind of watching what was going on in the world, watching what was going on with technology, and kind of a little bit of his anxieties about it, about how that we might progress technologically faster than we would kind of with our emotional maturity and our ability to deal with it as a species. So some of the endeavors we might be on, some of the achievements we might make technologically, we just wouldn't be ready for it, and we wouldn't know how to handle it. And originally the story was supposed to take place only a few years into the future. But he decided, so he could do more of a abstract, kind of straight allegory story that was much more about the message and the metaphor than having to be literal, he decided to put it off into some far-flung future where humanity has kind of come full circle in a lot of weird ways. Like there's a huge regression. There's this idea that the complacency of technology has made people almost like bored. They've defeated death. They've become immortals. And there's some sort of arrogance that comes with that. And then you have people that start meddling, start wanting to do things with lower classes of humanity, and a hierarchy will always develop. So you have like this class of kind of waspy, out of touch, apathetic immortals. And then you have their playthings that are kind of kept off in a different part of the world. And that this one guy in particular goes out and pretends to be this god Zardoz. And he kind of pits people against each other, and then you find out as the film goes on really what the real deal is, and like how they're manipulating people actually to be kind of like slaves. So it's all about these kind of systems of control, and everybody is controlled by something, and there's a hierarchy that naturally forms in that, whether people realize it or not. Even the people at the top, even the immortal people are also under systems of control. And part of what controls people is what you know, knowledge. So that becomes a big theme of the movie. Like that being kind of this great equalizer. But not everybody is equipped to handle knowledge correctly or to read into it in the way that maybe they should. And you find in Sean Connery's character, who makes a weird star turn, right? Because this is a couple years after his last Bond movie. And maybe we'll talk about that in a second. He is somehow equipped to be able to deal with it in a broader scale. He sees the larger picture of life and humanity. He sees that there is a balance. There's a symbiosis between living and dying. and about youth and age and how everything kind of should complement each other and how we have to kind of move forward like that. Now, the movie maybe does not explicitly explain all that stuff in the way that I just did. It does not lay it out for you. It can feel confusing, especially the first time you see Zardoz. It's kind of a weird head trip of a movie. Like I said, it's mostly metaphor. It's mostly allegorical. There's not a lot of tangible feeling stuff to like really latch onto with Zardoz. But I think, after this is probably like the third time I've seen Zardoz in my life, and it was just like randomly, I was like been wanting to watch Zardoz for a while. Just revisit Zardoz, and I came away really enjoying it this time in a way that maybe I hadn't before. I have this weird thing, and this is not like it's not some sort of grandiose position or whatever, but like I don't really watch movies ironically anymore. I kind of let that go in my 20s. It's not interesting, and you don't get anything out of movies when you kind of put this parameter on yourself. You put this limiter on what you're able to get out of something. If you're watching something to laugh at it and be like, oh, it's just so ridiculous, so over the top. So when I watch something like Zardoz, I'm going to try to meet the movie halfway. I want to meet the movie on its own terms and experience what it's trying to accomplish. Does it execute on that well? And then kind of get into the nuance of it. Zardoz is kind of hard to do that because it is so abstract at times. It can be really hard to follow because it ends up being about everything, and then in some ways that can make it feel like it's about nothing. Just about almost like too many things. It's trying to touch on too many facets of the human existence without really honing in on one thing to drive us through the story. I mean, because it gets into sexuality, it gets into the masculine and the feminine in terms of like in psychological terms, but I would say the big takeaway of everything is about the symbiosis of things. And also, it's also even got a subtext about storytelling, the power of storytelling as a heuristic so that we don't forget where we came from. All stories have embedded in them principles, lessons, virtues. And they're deeper than philosophy sometimes in people's lives. Dostoevsky is a good example. If you read things like Crime and Punishment or Notes from the Underground, those are philosophy books, but they're really just hidden inside of a narrative. But it makes it so you, the reader, the audience, whoever, can connect with it. You connect with it on a deeper level. And you learn those virtues and those lessons through the storytelling. And Zardoz totally recognizes that, makes notice of it. It ends up being a big pull in the third act of the story. So if I have a criticism of just the storytelling in Zardoz, is that it does really sincerely... Hold on. It really does sincerely feel like it's all over the place. Sorry about that. It feels like it's all over the place a little bit, and I wish that it kind of had maybe a stronger character to anchor it, and that has nothing to do with the casting. Actually, I think the movie's really well cast. I love everybody in this movie. Charlotte Rampling is otherworldly gorgeous in this movie. It's a very early role for her. She's like, to me, she's like one of these, like, just these timeless beauties. I feel the same way about Helen Mirren. I get like hypnotized by how beautiful they were when they were young, and they've aged pretty well too. But yeah, she's gorgeous in this movie. But the big thing that most people probably pay attention to is Sean Connery's casting. Now, this was not a role that was made for Connery. It was actually supposed to be Burt Reynolds. And because John Boorman directed Deliverance, which, I mean, come on. Which I guess you could say that is about life and survival as well. But imagine going from Deliverance and then being I don't know if you would be a John Boorman fan, but imagine going from Deliverance to Zardoz. I mean, that's the kind of director he was. That's kind of why he's awesome. It was supposed to be Burt Reynolds, and he ends up having to fall out, so they had to get another hairy-chested dude. They offered to Sean Connery, and Connery takes it on the cheap for about $200,000, even though he was James Bond. Diamonds Are Forever had just come out not too long before this, but he could not get work. He was typecast in a real serious way, and he really had a hard time during those Bond years of getting cast as other types of roles. So, and that's why he had so much resentment towards the character of Bond and really didn't want to have anything to do with it after the fact, is because, or for so long, for a very long time, he didn't even like talking about it, was because it really almost kind of derailed his entire career. So he takes Zardoz. I don't know if he's the best casting decision in hindsight. I feel like Sean Connery probably did not have any fucking clue what was going on, so he kind of just, his performance is completely like this, supposed to be like this kind of primalistic, innocent, impulsive caveman type of a character that is kind of slowly comes into this kind of role of discovery about the nature of not just the world, but of life itself and what makes life meaningful. And I don't think the movie does a very good job all the time, like I said, of tracking his journey. I wish there was a stronger through line with his character and what was going on with his character, because I do think the movie has some profound things to say, and that sometimes can get in the way, because I don't think like Connery just didn't have like the internal understanding of the story, and I think it comes through in his performance. Like when this character is supposed to be making what feels like substantial discoveries that would change his attitude or change his behavior in some ways, Connery was not really adept at like kind of signaling that to you, right? Connery's not, in fairness, Connery's not a bad actor, but Connery's also not like an actor with a lot of range, right? He kind of is good at what he does. You cast Connery because you want to cast Sean Connery. You want the kind of iconoclast type of paradigm. You want people to see him that way. It's like a meta thing when you cast Sean Connery. And I respect his reasons for wanting to do this movie. And it's cool that he did it. But I don't know if he's the most successful at conveying this information to the audience. But Zardoz is a really interesting movie. I think it's worth your time. If you're a science fiction fan, it's totally worth your time. I don't think it's going to be for everybody. In fact, I would say that it probably is not going to work for most people. But if you're an adventurous film goer that just appreciates like weird science fiction movies and kind of want to have a better understanding of science fiction movie history, Zardoz is a movie that you got to see. You got to check out Zardoz. It's everything. It's silly, it's campy, it's pretentious, it's unwieldy. It's something that has to be experienced, and I do think it is a movie that actually gets better on repeat viewings. Once you kind of understand the world, everything isn't just, you're not just being assaulted with information constantly. You can kind of just pay attention to some of the nuance that's at play that Boorman kind of seeded throughout the story. There's a lot of stuff to appreciate. I'm not going to say that it's a masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination. If Boorman has a masterpiece, in my opinion, it's Excalibur, which maybe we'll talk about Excalibur one of these days. I've been meaning, now that I'm on the Boorman train, the John Boorman train, maybe we'll get into that at some point. All right, everybody. Well, that's all I really got to say about Zardoz. And I want to get a video done before I pass out here from COVID fatigue. Yeah, so if you'd like to know more about Zoobox, you want to keep up to date with everything Zoobox, there's a bunch of links in the description for Facebook, for Instagram, for my personal Twitter. Also, if you would like to make a suggestion for one of these daily videos, just, leave a comment, and I'll throw it on the list. In Zardoz. Goodbye.